Weeks of campaigning, thousands of leaflets shoved through doors, dodging dogs and journalists, the pouring rain, sleet, wind, hail. That's what life was like for hundreds of candidates fighting this winter election, the first in decades. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is Chopper's Election Podcast, coming to you as ever from the bowels of the Red Lion pub on Whitehall. Today we'll find out what it's like to win an election, and to do that just 4.5 weeks after being selected, knowing no one in the constituency. And with me on Chopper's Election Podcast are two new Tory MPs who did just that. Joy Morrissey, the new MP for Beaconsfield, and Richard Holden, the new MP for North West Durham. Each of them have their own story to tell. Joy Morrissey fought off Dominic Grieve, a long-standing Tory MP, and then later an independent. And Richard Holden fought off Laura Pidcock, a left-wing Labour MP, winning the seat for the first time ever for the Conservatives in North West Durham. Joy Morrissey, Richard Holden, welcome to Chopper's Election Podcast.
Hello.
How are you both?
Very
good, thank you.
What an extraordinary few days you've had. Now, Richard, I've known you for about 15 years now.
Certainly have, yeah.
Because you're a brilliant special advisor to various ministers, communicating out what they want to tell the press and sort of stopping any gaffes. And now you're an MP. I was shocked to look at your name on Wikipedia. It says Richard Holden, brackets, British politician, which is what you are.
It's not shocking, Chris. It's accurate.
Tell us your quick story, Richard. You were about to have a job running regional media, weren't you? Which is organising trips for the PM around the country.
So
central office.
Indeed, I was on the Prime Minister's his leadership campaign team actually, and I was probably going to end up doing a pretty similar role I'd done then in the general election campaign, and then obviously with everything it moved so quickly that with 2 days to go I was selected for North West Durham.
So what date was that? Do you remember the date?
I don't remember the date. I think it was a Tuesday before nominations closed on the Thursday.
So that's mid-November.
So it's mid-November, and basically I was phoned up. The locals said they liked me, so I went up. So I was selected on the Tuesday, drove up through the night back to my family home in East Lancashire, picked up some stuff and just drove to the constituency. On my way, I booked a holiday cottage for the duration of the campaign, and so moved into the constituency basically 36 hours after being selected in a little beautiful village called Woolsingham, right in the heart of the constituency, and stayed there, apart from for a couple of hours when I was literally going to pick people up from Durham train station who were helping me out for the next 6 weeks.
That's amazing.
And every day pounding the streets of North West Durham.
And did you have any staff when you arrived? Is there an infrastructure of any sense?
No, there's none at all. So as I arrived at the place I was staying, I had 2 members of the local association who were there to literally co-sign my nomination papers, and that was it. And David, who's in his mid-60s and retired engineer, and Marion, who's a retired teacher, were in her early 70s. That was my campaign team. And
that is unbelievable.
And everything else was built up from there.
In 3 weeks, you from that position of having 2 Marion and David sign your papers, it was 3 or 4 weeks, wasn't it? I think
it was 4.5 weeks.
4.5 weeks. You then won the seat of North West Durham from no less than Laura Pidcock.
Yeah, the former Shadow Secretary of State. Yeah. So won it clean offer, 8,000, just under 9,000 Tory majority. A Labour majority, switched to a just under 1,200 Conservative majority.
Swing of over
just under 10.5%, I think.
Gosh, I mean that's
which is a sort of by-election style swing, really. It's a sort of big number.
Well, we'll come back to how you won your campaign. Sure. So to you, Joy Morrissey, you were taking on Dominic Grieve, weren't you, in Beaconsfield?
Indeed.
And that's his own different challenge. That's a southern seat, of course.
Yes.
But you're up against a lot of loyalty to a well-regarded and liked politician.
Quite. And the seat was a 50-50 Remain and Leave seat. Dominic had been there for 22 years, so it was certainly a challenge, a sort of uphill battle, but we had a great grassroots team that was out campaigning with me.
When were you selected? Did you know that?
I think it was the 9th of November. It was a Saturday, yes. And funnily enough, Martin Howe was in my selection and also in Dominic Grieve's selection back in when...
Martin Howe, the barrister?
Mm-hmm. He stood against Dominic when he was selected in 97, I think, and then against me.
And there was a rumour that Boris Johnson might get your seat. I was told that a few times because Uxbridge looked a bit iffy and he might just be carpet-bagged your seat. Was that a real rumour or it was a rumour?
I'm sure they would have loved that. But I came in at the sort of last 11th hour. I was a replacement for another female candidate who had pulled out. So I didn't expect to get the seat and was thrilled to get it.
So like you, I mean, around the same time, you had 4.5 weeks from a standing start. Were you equally having very little friends in the constituency when you turned up?
Well, I didn't really, I just met everyone as the campaign has gone on. And what we've seen is a large number of people that sort of came out of the woodwork that have just been campaigning every day that weren't necessarily traditional campaign activists, but became very mobilized during this campaign. I don't know if you had the same thing.
I had exactly the same thing. So from David and Marion, from the little acorns, the great oak grew of having about 12 to 15 locals who really came out every day, rain or shine. And just absolutely, they wouldn't be, a lot of them with family commitments, so they'd work it around that. One guy doing night shifts and would finish his night shift at sort of 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, and then come and do a couple of hours with us. There was all sorts of just people really wanting to get it done. And, we even had a little youth surge of young Tories.
Youthquake.
Yeah, a mini youthquake as some of the youngsters joined the party at the last minute and got involved. And it was just...
What do you think was
really
motivating? What was in their Weetabix? You can't pay them.
No,
pay them. What was it that got these 15? The guy on his night shift working 2 more hours in the morning.
I think what there's probably pretty similar for Joy actually. There was people didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. That for whether it was people who were full-time jobs were working really hard in my neck of the woods, or small business owners, people were just petrified of what Jeremy Corbyn would do. And also the local MP was so closely associated with him as a real cheerleader and outrider for him as well. So that played into it. I think the other thing was Brexit, a general feeling of that Labour had just ignored people locally, and I think that Brexit thing, in a way, it crystallised what the constituency had felt for a long time, which was that Labour had ignored them, but it had never quite ignored their vote in the same way before.
And did it matter that you had just arrived literally off the train?
I think. Well, in my car actually.
But literally, as though you arrived from the moon, you appeared.
I arrived. The locals chose me, and I arrived in my car over what's called Killop Pass, and it was snowing in the night
on your own
in the middle of the night. It was very dark, and drove over the Pennines from home. But they just took to me, and I think they took to me because look, it helps the fact that I'm northern. I'm from East Lancashire, so that's
So when they said
a similar
to you,
sort of area,
do you know the area? Presumably you had to work out the geography of the seat you're in. I mean, and you couldn't lay claim to any local roots, could you?
I was very honest about that from the start. I wasn't local, but I'm from a similar sort of part of the world. Although on my side of the Pennines growing up, it was textile manufacturers, which went into reverse with a small amount of quarrying and that sort of thing. On the other side, in County Durham, it was steel manufacture and coal mining. So it's a similar sort of area. I also grew up in a little ex-council house on the side of a small village.
So you can relate to people that way.
Yeah, and I think they found that on the doorstep as well. I think they were more interested, actually, a lot of people, in as long as you understood where they were coming from, and if you also had a real passion to make things better for the area. I'm sure you probably found something similar.
Well, Joy Morrissey, of course, you were
from the Leeds equivalent of Ohio.
But you also, you're shortlisted for the London mayoralty, weren't you?
I was.
Against Sean, and he won. And you're well regarded. You're known within the party. You're, I would say, an A-lister, high achiever. And of course, you were too. But your seat was a harder win for the party, whereas Joy was more of a bankable.
I think it was a very different battles, but both on the same battle of Brexit, really.
It wasn't. It wasn't for you, but you were trying to rely on people in your association who might be loyal to Dominic Grieve. I imagine. I'm guessing this.
Yes.
And how did you win them round to help fight for you?
Well, I tried to sort of reach out to everyone. I said, for me, it was about democracy. So it wasn't if you voted Leave or Remain. It was about supporting the result of the referendum and delivering Brexit. And we had people that were coming on board, that were helping on my campaign, that actually voted Remain, but believed that we had to uphold the democratic result of the vote, and that we needed to honor the will of the people. And so we had people from all sides of the debate coming on board, and we tried to create a very unified campaign. And it was always a challenge. We had a lot of Lib Dems coming in to help on the other side.
Because the candidate stood down, didn't he?
Yes, we
famously
had no...
and that was a worry, because that was a few thousand votes going to him.
Absolutely. And we had a lot of media scrutiny, and we had a lot of media sympathy for the independent candidate. And so, we weren't sure.
That's Dominic Grieve.
Yes. Exactly. I can say his name now.
You say his name now. That's listeners. That's what you do. You don't name the person. He doesn't exist in the candidate's mind. But you can move on from that.
Now we can move on and speak freely.
Did your association, was it split? Were there lots of people going to support Dominic for his independent campaign?
I have to say I had a fantastic agent. Philip was amazing, and he really came through, and we had a lot of people who just came on board and put their jobs and careers on hold, and we created a lot of leaflets. I think people delivered more leaflets than have ever been delivered in the history of Beaconsfield. And we canvassed more than we've ever canvassed in the constituency. So we did a lot.
Did you go to every house?
We leafleted every house. I mean, I think they were sick of our leaflets by the end. But, I mean, there were people that just, Colette, Cy, all these people that were just literally giving their heart and soul to making the campaign possible.
How do you feel about that? I mean, I would be quite emotional about that if that were me.
I was told not to cry at the count.
I would have cried because I think these guys are working all around the clock to get you into Parliament, and for you, Richard, that is, and they don't even know you. I mean, none of these people knew you, and they are basically there saying we're going to back you two. Is that great?
I think one of the nice things is they do get to know you. And that's you get to know them, they get to know you. You become a campaign team over the course of a campaign. You'll see it if you work at close quarters in any situation that it becomes like an extended family. You rely on each other. You get to find out each other's quirks.
Over 3 weeks of intense life together.
Yeah, 3, 4, 5 weeks of intense life together.
Camp or something.
You wake up and the first person I would speak to was David, my agent, and he was the last person I'd speak to before I went to bed at night. And I would, after he went to sleep, I would do a bit of social media stuff and try and tee things up for the next day and all that sort of thing. And I think quite an interesting parallel between both our seats is that actually Labour hadn't really fought that as hard in the past in North West Durham.
Allow me to ask you about Laura Pidcock. I mean, did you meet her? Did she know? She would say, "Here's a carpetbagging candidate from the Tory Party. I'm a local girl, been here for a while." I think
that would have been quite a difficult thing to say because it would have sort of assumed that I was going to win. Yeah. And obviously she had an enormous majority, and at the last election had a 55% of the vote. Yeah. So anybody who suggests I was a parachuted in candidate, I was parachuted in without a parachute behind enemy lines. With the weight with the weight of momentum, activists cracking on the ground like stormtroopers. Yes.
I'll withdraw this.
So yeah,
you said you dropped in at the last moment because of, and then all the odds. What were your odds of winning?
I think at the start it was the odds of. I think Laura was 15-1 on.
What were your odds?
And I was. I think I was roughly about 15-1 at the very start of the campaign.
Because it's a 2-horse race essentially, so you wouldn't be that far away.
But at the start of the campaign, Laura, the previous election got 55% of the vote, and the Conservatives got 35% of the vote. Yeah. So that's a 20-point deficit. It requires an over 10% swing, which you don't get in general elections. I can't remember what the swing was nationally this time, but it was probably 5 or 6%.
Okay.
Over 10%.
So we see where the odds are. Did you meet her at all?
I met her. Yes, I met her at the hustings, which
organised
by the Lanchester Cricket Club after public pressure because there hadn't been a hustings organised and nobody seemed to want to. So I met her there, and she'd brought along quite a lot of her sort of Momentum supporters, but.
Your 15 mates
who are
new mates.
Yes, yeah. They, unbelievably, when the tickets went on sale at 6 a.m, they did sell out within the hour. So I'm not saying, I'm sure that people were just so anxious to get there. And then I met her at the count as well, and those are the only 2 times I met her.
And did she at least be a bit gracious when she said "well done"?
She was pleasant enough to me one-on-one. I think it was very difficult for her on a personal level, and I think the truth is it wasn't purely about her at all. No, it was Labour had taken the area for granted. That's what people said on the doorstep. Labour took their votes for granted, despite going against them on Brexit. And
was it a Brexit area? What are
55-45. So not as strong as some parts of the country.
For Brexit,
yeah, 55-45 for Brexit. So not as strong as some parts of the country, and not overwhelmingly like some of the parts of the Durham coast, which were well over 60-65%. Okay. But it lent to Brexit. But it was a sort of just as I said before, just a combination of things, and people just feeling ignored by Labour, and that Labour were ignoring democracy, and it was the similar democracy point which I think Joy found in Beaconsfield as well.
Yes, you met Dominic Grieve. You must have met him around the party before you became a candidate there. So he knew you.
Well, I don't know if he did, but I had met him.
met him before.
Yes, but we did several hustings together, so we got
did
to
you?
know each other fairly well.
You got to like him? I mean, he's quite a likeable guy, isn't he?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's the difficulty in this situation was the, I believe I'm a party loyalist, and so I really put the party first. And so it was a very difficult situation, and I'm glad that we can now sort of move forward. And I think what Boris did very well was keep that positive message. Despite all the media attention and all the bias that was happening, he really stayed with that positive message that I think actually did resonate with a lot of people, even if they didn't admit it publicly. I think it really did resonate, and that negativity and fear, I think people were just ready to move forward. People were ready to move the country forward. People wanted to honor the democratic result. And I think there was that consensus of let's just move on.
Yeah, let's get it done. I mean, it was something I imagine was repeated ad nauseum by people when people were speaking to them on the doorstep before it became even the sort of central thrust of the campaign. It was something that has been reflected back, and it was reflected back consistently throughout the campaign. Again, whether Leaver or Remainer, people just wanted to get it done.
End the uncertainty.
And on the referendum.
I think the best thing to do is if you want to lose an election is have Hugh Grant come and endorse you, because that's absolutely I'm going to get in trouble for that one.
Well, I think all the seats he attempts to win, he lost. Did Hugh Grant work campaign with Dominic Grieve?
That was his first one.
Well, Hugh, I didn't see Hugh in North West Durham. It's
too far north. In terms of the national, I'm always struck by elections about how the national picture is quite divorced from the local picture. Did the big stories that were making the news during the campaign have any effect to you, Richard? For example, the Andrew Neil interview, which Boris Johnson didn't do, the photograph of the poor child on the floor in the hospital, which the PM wouldn't look at, then did look at. Did that affect the vote in any sense?
I think there is quite a lot of difference between what happens on Twitter and what happens on Facebook, actually, in a very basic sense.
Is Twitter left-wing and Facebook right-wing?
No. Twitter is a very metropolitan demographic. You and I, Chris and Joy, probably are on Twitter.
We love it.
We're probably on too much. But actually, what people were talking about on Facebook, which is where most people get their, they share, they use it like a local newspaper, actually. I've got Facebook groups across the constituency for Concert, for Crook and Willington, for Weardale, and it's like their local notice board page. The things which they were interested in were not those sorts of flim-flammy national stories at all. In fact, those underlying tenets of the campaign just remain the same throughout. Brexit, Corbyn, being taken for granted.
Corbyn's character, really.
It's Corbyn's character, and also, it was a woman put it to me on the doorstep of a place called Langley Park. Now, Langley Park it used to be a pit village, and she was in her late 70s, and she said that she'd been chatting to her neighbour the previous day, and her neighbour had said, well, I'm thinking of voting Conservative. And the lady I was chatting to said, well, I'm going Conservative. And she said, well, but, won't you, I'm just worried that my dad will turn in his grave. And the lady said to me, she'd told her neighbour that your dad's been dead for 30 years. This isn't the Labour Party he would have supported back then. It's a totally different thing. And that was the sort of thing that we got on the doorsteps. You had ex-miners, in their late 60s, early 70s, saying they're voting Conservative for the first time. You had some people who'd come across in 2017 saying, I voted for Conservative for the first time in 2017, and I'll definitely be voting for you again. And last time it was just me, but I've now convinced the husband. Or the husband saying, I've now convinced the wife to come over as well. So it's been a process, but it's something that is going one way.
But it was easy for you, Joy Morrissey, because you're talking to Tory voters who are voting Tory again. So all you had to do was say to them, put aside your loyalty to a great man, Dominic Grieve. He's wrong on Brexit. Let's get Brexit done. Is that what your pitch was?
Well, I think it was also looking at a different demographic as well, of just trying to appeal to a broader base in maybe different parts of the constituency. In the IVAs, we did very well in Farnham Common and Burnham, and those weren't necessarily our strongest areas before, but I think that the message of what we were saying and also caring about local issues. I mean, I think the press would come to our hustings and by the end they would be so bored because we were just talking about really local things that I'm very and I'm very passionate about it. And actually,
that's fine.
And I love it. And just talking about the Green Belt, talking about transport issues, talking about HS2, making sure that we have a local agenda that matters to people. And that was what came up time and time and time again. And I think that's what they want for a member of Parliament. But it was it was a great honour and privilege to see the result and to get elected. I mean,
Coming to that, when did you find out or know you're going to win? Or when do you think...
4:30 in the morning.
when do you think you're going to win? I mean, when you finally slumped down and had a gin and tonic at 10 o'clock last Thursday night, did you think, Joy, I'm going to be an MP shortly, or did you think, crumbs, it's tight?
I had no idea what to expect. I think from standing in 2017, where the result...
Yeah, where'd you stand there? Sorry.
Ealing Central in Acton, I got quite a... I lost pretty badly. Okay. So this was... I didn't want to even say, or I didn't want to predict anything, and it wasn't until I went in and saw the ballot paper sort of piling up, my agent took me around and said, okay, can you see that there's actually physically more ballots for you? And so,
So around midnight or 2 a.m. you started thinking...
Yes, I started to feel a little more reassured that,
And then you're told, aren't you, in a little gathering before you go on stage?
Well, and I looked at the number when he showed it to me, and I kept looking, and he said, is that okay? And I said, okay, I'm just taking it in, because I couldn't really take in the sort of majority and the result.
15,712 majority, 27.2%. That's a big number.
It is.
And was Dominic second?
Yes, he was. Yeah. He was.
Shook hands and
yes, and I thanked him in my speech, and
he spoke well too, I saw.
He did.
Yeah,
he did.
And when did you find out you're going to beat Laura Pidcock?
Well,
Richard Holden.
My majority was slightly narrower.
Yes. 1,144.
Yeah, 2.4%. Yeah. So we had an inkling. I knew we were going to be close, because we'd spoken to people on the doorsteps, and people had solidified. People who'd said they were wavering between the two of us had really started to say, I'm probably going to go Conservative, or I'm going Conservative. So people who had said they were going to be, they had been Labour in the past, but they were sort of thinking about it. They started to come over in the last couple of weeks, properly nail it on in the last couple of weeks.
So you had an idea? Did you go into...
So we had an idea. We had an idea going to the count that it was going to be very close. And
do you report that back to central office?
Well, I did. I did.
You text someone you didn't know all the guys.
I know. But on the night, I'd had to trade, because remember, this is a local association which hadn't done an awful, wasn't big,
barely existed.
Wasn't big, barely existed really. So we trained them to do. I trained them on the night just before the count to do tallying, so that they could get the.
What's tallying for?
So that's as you open a ballot box. And you tip all of the folded ballot papers out there. What you can do is you can tally them as the individual counting officers. They unfold the ballot papers.
You can count them.
And you literally tally them. So
you're counting.
You're counting them.
Yeah. And so you check that against what the actual final vote is.
You do. Basically, there's a very slight bias in your favour and a slight bias against the minor parties. And our tally was the exact result.
Was it?
Apart from it overestimated both the main parties' votes very slightly, which is what you'd expect, but the split was practically exactly right.
So you went in there, you arrived at the count around midnight or so?
And I didn't believe it, because I thought my guys were so brand new, they'd probably overestimated me in the tallying.
They like you so much.
Well, it's because people do, right? Nobody wants to, you've worked for somebody, the last thing you want to do is the person who tells them they're going to lose. Yeah. But it was actually almost exactly bang on. So yeah, it was absolutely. So
you knew when was your result? What time?
We really knew when all the ballot papers were finally stacked up, and there were 6 different piles of them around in different boxes, and I could see that's me level pegging, that's me ahead by 100 or so, that's me level pegging, that's me ahead by a couple of hundred, that's me ahead by about 500 in that one, and that's me level pegging. So I knew that you could add them up, and it was then I phoned up the deputy director of campaigning at central office and said, actually, no, we have actually done it. And then we had our little huddle as well. Yep. And
we're told the result by the returning officer.
Told the preliminary result at that point by the returning officer. I tried to be nice to Laura and said I personally didn't understand it would be a very difficult time for her. And so I just asked Laura if she wanted to do a bundle check, just as a... she was a shadow cabinet minister in in a seat that had never ever been Conservative, and so I just wanted, for her own peace of mind, that if she really thought there might have been a mistake or something, that she could ensure it was rectified. But, in the end, she said, no, it was fine. And we just went with the result. Yeah. And, she'd had tellers looking at every table, just like my guys had. So you sometimes know.
You said a few words, thanked your girlfriend and family. And
yes, and everything. And, and my little team who'd been up there. And there's a little photo of us all.
Had a drink afterwards?
I had a drink afterwards, but then it was... So the count wasn't even in my constituency. It was a neighbouring constituency of North Durham. So I drove to my agents, had half a glass of champagne, and then and then drove home and utterly
On your own?
Well, yeah, drove back to Walsingham, utterly exhausted.
Couldn't believe it.
Well, shell shocked, really. I mean, because you've put so much in, and finally it's over, and it's finally over, and you've won. And those people on the doorstep who were, they were being honest with you when they said they were switching over, and they did have faith. And it wasn't just the other thing was, it wasn't just they didn't just reject Labour. They also had to make a positive decision to back Boris Johnson and back.
I'm going to come on to that to you both just a second before we wind up. I saw you behind Boris Johnson in Sedgefield, weren't you, during the speech?
I did.
That was you. I was watching you grin.
I led him into the room because I was my old press officer job.
Yeah.
You were like, Richard, it's a really packed room, so you know what you're doing. So you walk him through and then sort of tuck him behind at the Sedgefield.
What did he say when you met him?
Oh, he was just, Richard, it's good to see you. He's really, he's really
a force of nature.
He is a force of nature
in that situation.
And also to go to the northeast. He'd been there several times during the campaign to Sedgefield. I mean, I wish he'd come to North West Durham.
Of course, and he will come.
I'm sure. Well, I hope so at some point. But to go to Tony Blair's old seat, which we won with a good Darlington candidate from right next door to Sedgefield, won by over 3,000 votes. Right, these were seats: North West Durham, Sedgefield, Labour majorities of 25,000 plus, 60-70% of the vote, and now they're represented by Conservative MPs.
Of course, it is day 3 of you being an MP or day 4. But how are you going to win back in 2024, Joy Morrissey? Have you worked out? Are you probably thinking now about how to deliver on the promise of this extraordinary majority you've been given?
Yes. I mean, I think I'm really going to be focused on local issues, local transport, HS2, Green Belt, protecting the Green Belt, protecting our grammar schools, really focusing on the issues that matter, making sure that we get some more funding for our county in terms of education and adult social care, and just really working with the other MPs for the area. We have really fantastic local MPs, and so just all of us working together to make sure that we're lobbying for the best.
And deliver on Brexit, crucially.
Absolutely.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And Richard, how about yourself?
I think very similar to what Joy said, actually. One of the things that the North East now has is a good collective group of Conservative MPs who can work together for the area.
You came down together, didn't you?
Yes,
a blue wall on the train.
blue wall. That's absolutely true. But there's stuff up there, which does need to really change. You've got the constituency is a mix of sort of urban, suburban, and rural. There's issues around rural transport, around Shotley Bridge Hospital, around A&E access at Bishop Auckland. I'm really keen on plugging the area in. There's no railway at all in the constituency. I want to get a rail line in there, and I'll campaign to get the studies and that sort of thing.
Chris Grayling at transport.
So I worked at transport, worked at education. I'll certainly use anything I can and leverage it, and not just for me.
And your
but for the entire
profile's going to
region.
be local, isn't it? So you'll be asking questions in PMQs about local issues.
Absolutely.
You both will.
For sure.
Yeah, but it is
because they'll be nervous. I imagine that the guy I get my papers from when I'm coming through London on the way to work on Sunday, he said, I love Boris. Then he said nervously, but what will he do for me? And I think there'll be a bit of maybe buyer's remorse on this, that they've backed you, but they're wondering, well, he's a Tory, and that might be wondering. I think so you have to
what they
go
want,
for it.
They want us to prove that we're about more than Brexit, right? They want us to prove that we can really deliver to these communities, and that's the challenge that I have, that Joy has, that all those MPs selected and elected across the country have this time, and that's what we're going to have to deliver.
But I think we're all very focused on our local areas. There's been no
You
talk.
gotta be.
From the new intake, we're really focused on what we can do for our.
And what do you want the government to do to help you, to support you in the Tory government, to make sure you can win the seat back in 2024 at the latest?
I think it's making sure that they're listening to what we're saying. We're speaking on behalf of our constituents, particularly if we're working together as a bloc, that this is something that is a crucial issue, that matters not just to our constituency, but the local county in general. And if we're coming together as a bloc, I hope that we'll be taken seriously. But I think there is a real local focus to everyone that I've been speaking to today.
No, I agree. It really is. It's, as I said, we've got to deliver locally, and that's working together locally. So us guys in County Durham, there are also seats we just missed out on in the north east of England. It's like one spec, we missed out by 500, and it's our job, just like the Teesside Mayor has done, to prove to the people of Teesside that you can vote Conservative and vote for competence. And similarly, now it's gone up to where
Are you both going to write down in a book how to win a seat from a standing start to election day in 4.5 weeks? Because you've got to write that down, because that is like key information.
I think the thing that I'll be
both of you,
the thing that we'll both be doing, I imagine, is just absolutely hammering it locally, because it's all very well winning once. You need to win again and again and again in order to deliver for these communities.
Richard Holden, Joy Morrissey, it's been fascinating to talk to you both. You literally are, it's your first day in Parliament and you spent time with Chopper's Election Podcast. We really thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
It's an honour to be here.
Thank you to my producers, Thea Ludis and Elliot Lampitt. And thank you for listening. We'll be back again on Friday morning with a Christmas special. You won't want to miss that. Do subscribe if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed our election shows, I would love it if you could leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to get in touch, do tweet us on Twitter. We're at Brexit Broadcast, or email us choppersbrexitpodcast@telegraph.co.uk. A few of you emailed us this week to ask why my colleagues and I didn't correctly predict the election result in our episode called The Election and Weather Forecast. Well, thank you for your feedback. I would say in my defence that I was halfway there. I got a 30-seat Tory majority against my colleagues in the lobby. But I know that's not good enough. Halfway there is still wrong, and I apologise. Don't forget, you can get 30 days free access to the Telegraph online, completely free of charge. Just go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper. And finally, as always, do buy your copy of the Daily Telegraph. You won't regret it. Until next time, cheerio!
Hello, I'm Mick Brown, and I write for the Telegraph magazine. That means I spend my days with my head deep in books and trawling Google and writing profiles, interviews, and investigative stories. This year I've been writing about psychedelic drugs as a possible cure for the world's greatest public health crisis, depression. And in a world exclusive with my colleague Robert Mendick, I tracked down and exposed India's most wanted man, the diamond dealer Nirav Modi, who was accused of embezzling $2 billion from one of India's biggest banks. But stories like these take time, and as we all know, time means money. That's where our subscribers come in. Without them, we just can't write the stories you enjoy reading or make podcasts like this one. So if you'd like to support what we're doing and to get unlimited access to the huge range of quality journalism on politics, business, lifestyle and more, go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where we have a special listener offer. You can get 30 days free access to the Telegraph online, and then after that it's just £2 a week. That's telegraph.co.uk/chopper, or click on the link in the show notes to this episode.